Welcome everyone, you're back with Shannon and Paula from Sage Wellness Connection, and we're back with another year of podcasts and webcasts as part of the Rural Mental Health Project. And today we're going to dive deeper into wellness in rural Alberta, and we're going to touch on the 8 dimensions as well. So we'll get started. So we thought we would introduce ourselves, just giving a little bit of our backgrounds and how it relates to rural communities. So for myself, I grew up in a small city, and at the time, I thought 30,000 people was very, very small until I moved to rural Alberta. Now I'm living in Wainwright, which is close to 6,000 people, but I have lived in smaller towns. I lived in a town that was 800 people. So I really have the full experience of living in that very small town. I also went to school after I left home and did live in Lethbridge. So I do know what a little bit of a bigger center is as well. So I just have that varying experience. And in my current employment, I support people to connect them to services and make referrals for mental health, addictions, all those kinds of services to support them financially as well. And so I understand some of the challenges at finding those services in rural communities. I mean, just for example, I know we talk about this a lot, Shannon, is the transportation for families that don't have a vehicle. It's a lot. And so I guess that's just a little bit of my background, and we'll get into a bit more as we go on. Well, I'll turn it over to you, Shannon.
Absolutely. And Paula, as you said, I'm Shannon Fife. Some of you may not have met us up until this point, but like Paula said, this is our second year of doing this. So we're very excited to dive in a little bit deeper in some of these areas that I think need a voice. And Paula, like you were saying, so different. Perspective is kind of everything. Growing up in Ontario, I lived in what we would call smaller towns. So I was outside of London, outside of Toronto, but we accessed those areas. So I did know the differences, but I thought, it was a long drive to get to London, and that was 20 minutes away. I had no idea until I came out here what that transportation piece could look like and how it could get in the way of receiving services and things like that, because to go to Edmonton from the very location we're at today is over 2 hours without any buses or anything like that. So I think it's really important that we consider those kind of things as we move forward. And I speak to my own experiences as far as starting something in Calgary where we were supporting people to find services, whether it be mental health, even just health itself. It was so much easier. And I thought it was a lot of work then to get people in, but honestly, it was basically around the corner. It could be accessed within a few days sometimes, if not probably within the week, where now we know that we're putting people on wait lists and they may not get that service that they require maybe for their kiddo or even for themselves. It could take over a year, if not longer. So
exactly.
Kind of some of the pieces that we wanted to talk about today, because they truly can have some impact. I don't want to make it negative. I love having the opportunity of living out in these rural locations, as just like Paula had a opportunity to live in a very small place. I lived in just outside of a little town that was not even 300 people. So there wasn't grocery stores and things like that either.
But the things that we take for granted.
Absolutely. And now, Wainwright has really been building itself up to have those things and amenities, but we're still struggling as far as getting access. And that's why we felt it was so primarily important to be able to teach as many people so they can feel confident and competent when they're talking about the 8 domains, and make it applicable too about where they're living.
For sure. And I think that's what we strive to do, and we will wrap it up at the end talking about our mental health and well-being resource hub, so you know what is out there and what you can connect with as far as formal and informal supports. And as always, we like to thank the Canadian Mental Health Association of Alberta and the Rural Mental Health Project for sponsoring this webcast. and their website is there. So please go and check them out and access their social media as well. They have great resources available.
And we always like to just dive in just a little bit about the Rural Mental Health Project itself and as to why we were doing really focusing on the things we are. And part of that is about it being community driven. Paula and I currently sit on an impact committee, which is a mental health and well-being focus to that committee. We talk lots about substance use and things like that as part of those factors that play into that need for that support around mental health and well-being. So I think that's important, and we really appreciate that about the project. But in that, like our mental health resource hub, we want to really acknowledge the strengths that we already have here. And sometimes those are your neighbors or the people just down the way that actually are bringing lots to this community that can really support people. But we're also trying to build that capacity into everybody so that they can help their neighbor if that is the case, until maybe that more formalized piece can play into that. And we were saying this is a whole community view. So we'll be looking at all aspects, all people that live within that community, because Wainwright itself has a military foundation piece to it, as well as the population. When we look to that, is we have lots of agricultural families, but then there's a lot of the oil industry has been based out of here for years. And it's not to say we're not diversifying as well, but those are some of those primary pieces. So we need to acknowledge that as we move forward. And ultimately, we like people to know that 5 in 5 people have mental health. Everybody has mental health. It's not this negative word that if you have mental health, there must be something wrong with you. We all have mental health. And what we need to learn is how do we keep it in the best possible shape that we can, no different than if we're going out and going for walks every day because we're worried about our physical health. What we've learned is that physical piece is one piece that we use to promote and build our own mental health.
And I think when we were working with different community members last year, we talked about mental health being on a spectrum as well. And it's like looking at where are you at today? And just like your physical health. Well, today maybe I'm a little bit tired. So where am I at physically? But you can use those tools as well to kind of gauge where you're at with your mental health and well-being also. All right, there we go. So our philosophy, if you've been with us before in our podcast and our webcast, you'll know that we like to look at a holistic approach to well-being. We like to look at all of the areas of our life and how they relate to each other, because we like to look at a wheel as far as the 8 dimensions of wellness. And we like to take the viewpoint that they are all interconnected and they're also all interdependent on each other as well. And when one area is out of sync, it can create an imbalance and it impacts your entire system. And so as we go on, we'll talk a little bit about how you can use some of the other areas to help you build up areas that are a bit out of sync as well.
And this is what Paula is talking about. We really like to view the mental health and well-being as a holistic approach. That's why we pick the wheel when we talk about the 8 domains, because they are all interconnected. They're connecting together at that maybe smaller point of it, but as we expand out in each one of them, we may have to look to whether it be our physical health, our financial health, our occupational health, and use those areas to build up maybe our emotional health. Or maybe that's vice versa. Maybe we have a strong emotional health and a strong social support so that when we are challenged in our occupational health, then we call upon those resources to maybe talk our way through to figure out what we could do differently. So it's just really understanding that all of those pieces are interconnected. They're going to play a part of your life. There's going to be some great, wonderful achievements in them, as much as there could be stresses that come along with them.
And we really like to use the word harmony. We've talked about before how when you're hearing a symphony orchestra warm up and you're hearing, squeaks and squawks and different people testing out their instruments, trying to make sure that they're ready to play. And then all of a sudden, when you hear the whole orchestra together, and it's just that beautiful harmonious sound. And that's what we like to picture when we picture ourselves in our optimum state of wellness.
And what I like about that analogy too is just like the musicians that are in that orchestra, you have to work at it all the time, because that's when things begin to happen, is when you're not whether it be about time constraints or whatever it is, if you're not being able to develop that area or strengthen that area, that's where things can sometimes go awry. Just like when you're in the orchestra, you got to be prepped and ready to go to be able to put that beautiful sound together.
Oh, absolutely. I think you mentioned before, Shannon, of the the younger kids. Maybe it's the grade 6 band concert when they're first learning to play, and the only time they really practice is when they're in class. So maybe it's a few times a week, and the difference is when you're in an orchestra, those orchestral musicians are practicing hours and hours each day to sound like that. And that's really where we're at with our wellness. We have to be intentional. We have to be purposeful with our well-being to stay on top of things. Otherwise, we're easily going to become out of sync. And I think that's coming up. We have a picture of our wheel when it is out of sync, and I think it's very important to take a look at.
Mm-hmm. And the reason we picked those 8 domains as well is because we felt that it really represented the broader version of what our life is made up of, and the things that can impact. When we talk about everybody has mental health, these are the things that we're talking about. We're not just talking about our emotional health. We're not just talking about that social piece. We need to have that spiritual piece, whatever that looks like for you. And when we dive a little bit deeper, or you listen to some of our podcasts or webcasts where we're talking about what each one of these mean, this is individual to you. So just because maybe for an intellectual health and well-being, I talk about going and taking lots of schooling, that doesn't mean that's what's right for you, or maybe the next person. It's just really being intentional, as Paula has said, about figuring out what really builds that curiosity, that excitement to be able to build, whether it is your intellectual health and well-being or your occupational health and well-being.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at what it looks like when we are out of sync a little bit. So we talk about a wheel, of course. You've probably heard us talk about that before. And when the wheel is not pumped up to where it should be and it's bumping along, there's going to be some flat spots when it's hitting the ground. And that's what our wheel looks like, our wellness wheel looks like when we're not taking care of ourselves and looking at ourselves in a holistic way.
And I think when we had Josh on here talking a little bit about that imbalance and those kind of things, he talked a little bit about that, I guess we can call it emergency light on in our car. We can ignore it for sure. And I'm just as guilty as pretty much anyone, that when I really don't want to deal with whatever's going on with my car, I just pretend like the light's not on, even though I know it's there and it might even be blinking at me. And when it gets more serious, it's even getting brighter. But sometimes we just keep putting it aside. And it's usually telling us we need to do something. And often it has to do with our tires. We might not be rolling down the road quite the same way or as best as we could be. And that's why when we talk about the wheel, it can happen and start impacting all of those areas, even though it might just be specifically started in, say, finances are so important. We hear nothing on the news but about finances, it seems these days. So it feels like that's a bit deflated on that side. Well, when that wheel's going around, it's beginning to impact all of those things. That's that emergency light going off and we're ignoring it. And it's maybe just something where we just need to go and spend a little bit of time and pump it back up to get everything in balance. Because we know in life, everything's not going to be perfect. We're not always going to have everything aligned, and we can keep pushing down the road. But the better, the more time spent basically to get that balance in place is where we'll feel our actual optimum.
Exactly. But just like the vehicle with your light on, it can become overwhelming because it's like, how do I figure out what's wrong without, I don't have time to take it in, or I don't have the finances to take it in right now. But sometimes the wellness, figuring out what's going on with your state of wellness or your state of well-being is just as overwhelming. Where do I start? How do I figure out what's going on? How can I actually use those different domains to be able to support the other domain to get pumped up? Well, this is what we use as a way to gauge our well-being in our areas that are a little bit out of sync and the areas that are really doing well. And it is our a wellness assessment. And so I don't know if I can make that bigger or not, Shannon, without
kind of going into it. Well, and I think the biggest pieces to this is exactly what you're saying, Paula. You have to look to some form of assessment to really know, because otherwise we might be making an emotional decision because maybe we feel like our finances are the problem, but actually that might be an emotional response because maybe we couldn't buy or go on a trip or whatever it was. So that's our emotional response on, that's what I wanted to do, now I'm mad, so it must be about my finances. And sometimes it can just be about, I'm not feeling socially connected. I've been spending so much time in my house doing my work that I'm just not feeling connected. So maybe I didn't need to go on the big trip to make that happen. And maybe I just needed to envision what I could do within my community. And that's the piece of this assessment. It breaks down each one of those domains, specifically looks to the important aspects of that to really determine where is that wheel deflated. And then we can, obviously we're going to take in some other factors to that. And even the focus today is we are out here in rural Alberta. So we really want to focus then, once we've made that assessment about how we're feeling, then let's look to that community and where we live, and then how we can begin to achieve some of those goals and even come up with goals, because that's what the assessment does as well.
Absolutely. And if you're looking to use our assessment, please connect with us through our website, through social media, or you can email us directly and we will send you a copy, and you can answer the questions, and it'll give you a chance to score your answers and then determine next steps from there.
Absolutely. And just before we go on to the next thing, I do want to say that if you wanted something a little bit more in depth, that is what Paula and I do on the side of that, if you want to go in a little bit deeper than just that assessment and figuring out, which piece of the wheel is deflated, we can help you put those pieces together, because we know that can be a little bit overwhelming as well.
Absolutely. Just like taking your car to a mechanic, you're going to consult with someone to get the support that you need to get.
Absolutely. So what
just looking, you go ahead, Shannon.
I just probably was going to about say the same thing as you. I'm so excited to be able to really talk about the differences, because we spent the last year just getting the information out, really talking and hammering home about the 8 domains and the impacts and where we can access services. And that part of the project is going to continue, because we want to make sure that we're still offering what is local. When we talk about that strength-based piece about the Rural Mental Health Project, well, this is the exciting part, because there are differences. This is why people choose to live in rural areas as opposed to urban areas. One is not more right than the other. It's just whatever is more right for you, kind of thing. But in noting that, we also have to understand what's available to us and what does that lifestyle really look like, and how can we support it in a way that it becomes that lifestyle that you were really seeking in a really good, positive, supportive fashion.
Exactly. It's not a one size fits all type of way to look at urban versus rural. We have to break them apart a little bit and look at the uniqueness of each of each area.
And I think what's important is right now, the rural and remote areas make up about 22% of Alberta. So that's 1/4 of Alberta. And because that's just population, not necessarily about geographic area, that's a totally different scope than that we would be looking at, because we have those kind of and I'm not insulting and leaving out any city by any means, but we have kind of three primary areas that people, if you're from outside of this province, would think of, and they would think of Edmonton and Calgary and probably Red Deer because they sit along that main line. And we were building beyond that, but it's in the geographics of it, there's a whole lot of areas that make up this province and the population. A whole lot of work gets done and helps drive the economy. And I think that that's what we're talking about today. And we wanted to give a bit of a snapshot of, Wainwright's not certainly by any means that we both suggested earlier, one of the smallest of towns by any means, but to put in perspective, when we're only talking about less than 1,700 families in an area, that's not very big. That wouldn't even be a tenth of the size of when we look about those external kind of communities that are created in the Edmontons and Calgarys. They would be 10 times that easily, if not 100 times that. So just putting perspective of numbers and how many kiddos that we have living here. And that's what creates the problem when we talk about services, because how do you keep people employed? Even though we do have this MD and we do attract people into these small towns, now that we've kind of built the small town up to have some things that bring people to town, like the Walmarts and the co-ops and so on, and the nice small businesses that are popping up, but we need population to come to them. And that impacts our services as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're back to that transportation piece because there's just limitations to who can come in. We're not going to be able to actually have a neurologist, for example, come into our community. We don't have the population to be able to support that type of service. So we have to travel outside, which is okay. But then we need to look at, I guess, what can happen before we need those services to maybe provide some extra support.
And I think that, finally, as I cross my fingers, hope that we're kind of moving away from that pandemic view of life here in the world, basically. But what that has done is expose a little bit about the services and that lack of access to services. And right now, what research is showing us is that both boys and girls in these more remote areas are really reporting that they have a lower self-rated health and a lower functional health. So that is just about access to services and how they're feeling. And then as well, that we're seeing things that more kiddos, I call them kiddos, but youth, I guess we'll say, are smoking. I'm going to say.
Do they have ages on that study? That's interesting.
We're talking more youth. So anyone under the age of 18. So I would think 13 to 18 is right. What I was gathering. Certainly don't quote me on that, but that was where I felt the intention of that piece was going. And that, funnily enough, that girls are more likely now to be the smokers than boys. So, and that's them reporting that. So that's, when we're speaking of gender and so on, that's their reports coming from the people that are answering that and have been reported. But then we talk about the boys that have been, the research looks at, we're seeing more boys being overweight and even falling into that obese category. And they do feel that some of that had to do with the access of services during the pandemic as well. But then is how do you get kids back into that? How do we get, whether it's recreational level teams and things like that back on track again, right, as we're finding our way through to the other side of this pandemic. So I do think that's important, but we've got to talk a little bit about the drinking. Again, we're still seeing, I think it's 1 out of 4 boys are drinking, their drinking practices in like metro regions and small cities, small towns has dramatically increased. And I didn't even think that was possible. But when we talk about metropolitan areas, so now we're talking the bigger centers like the Edmonton, they've actually saw a little bit of a decrease.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So they basically have separated that out to that, from the Lethbridge down size. So we would fall within that category when we talk about Wainwrights as well.
So very current statistics.
Oh, absolutely. And like we said, some will be driven because of the pandemic and about
Mhm.
things not being available. But I think one really important difference when we talk about rural and remote stats is we're facing higher suicide rates, and that's quite alarming to me.
Yes, it is.
We're talking that's going to be inclusive of everything from the suicidal ideations to attempts to actual deaths. So that is, really unfortunate that we're seeing such an increase in that. And they don't necessarily feel that's just pandemic related. That's where we're just seeing that steady incline. And I'm going to guess on this for sure. I think it's access to service, right? And some of those other stigma factors that we do talk about, being in rural, remote areas, your neighbors know each other. So if you're going to walk in for services, whether it's counseling or mental health support, other people are going to know that your aunt or your aunt's friend could be the receptionist. And
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting people aren't very good with their confidentiality, but we're just in a small town. That's how it
Well,
goes.
and even in this day and age, there is access to counseling online. But when we're looking at real remote communities, unfortunately, our internet is still not where it should be. And
Yes.
so it also poses a challenge to have nice, smooth conversations with someone. It's very, I think there's quite a barrier when your internet is glitching and all of a sudden it comes back and you're both talking at the same time. That's a real barrier to services, and children often need that face-to-face connection to really be able to open up. So you're right, Shannon, there's still barriers. And then you mentioned the financial piece. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, I believe, um, we are faced with some increased costs.
Yes.
Cost of living has gone up. We talk about maybe they're a single parent who's living in a remote community and needs to drive in to get a counseling for their child. They have to drive in half an hour, but we know the cost of gas. There's just lots of barriers in place. And so, we do want to be positive, but we have to look to the reality of this before we can really move into how do we solve some of these issues that we're facing in these communities.
Absolutely. And I think people have heard if they've listened to our health and well-being podcasts and webcasts around families and the importance of creating healthy families, but you have to do that also with the adults in the room being able to role model good healthy habits. But when we're still faced out here where people are worried about the stigma, worried about the discrimination, worried about all of those things, they are still finding that people are not accessing services. The adults, that is, are not accessing services that they would need. And it's increasing the use of substances to mollify some of those concerns. So it's certainly something to take note of as we move forward. And I think it's already tough when you come out to a small area. Paula, you told many stories as well coming out. And when you're a newcomer, maybe you're not speaking like English as a second language. You're still working your way and learning that. Still a level of discrimination here because people just not accustomed to it. Not making excuses for it by any means, but what a tough thing to do if you're going to be that person, that newcomer. How are you going to feel connected to a community if you already feel that level of discrimination because just something as simple as language skills? And that is what they're finding is reducing also our newcomers accessing services based on some of those kind of things.
And we talk about this all the time for us to know who to go to because we work in the human services field. But still, when we started this project, I was surprised how many people have things to offer, whether it's informal or formal supports. And we've both worked in this field for over 15 years minimum, right? And so we still had to learn. So now if you're looking at a newcomer coming in and they have a language barrier, or just all of the things that pose some challenges when you move to a new community, and then you're trying to find supports and you're trying to find those little almost hidden supports that are being passed around by word of mouth still.
Mhm.
It's a challenge. So
Absolutely.
we still need to be able to work to support these people to access resources.
Absolutely. You know, I still joke about the fact of moving from Ontario out here. I thought that was a culture shock. English is my first language. I look like
Yeah.
everybody else walking around in this small, conservative, traditional center.
Mhm.
So I found it challenging. I can't imagine
Mhm.
coming from a different country where all of my just the things I did and could expect daily aren't available to me. As we all
Mhm.
know, if we've done any traveling, what it feels like, you know, to finally hear somebody who's speaking English when you're sitting in another country. You can't appreciate that until you've done that. So I applaud anyone who's willing to come here and, you
Yeah.
know, English is that second language. All of those things that they anticipate and just have lived with are no longer available to them. And to be able to remake a life in that, I think that's just something that we need to be aware of because it
Yeah,
just
for sure.
you're not going to find as many groups. Like if you're in Edmonton, you're going to find those cultural or ethnic groups that you can connect with in an easier way and in a quicker way. And we just don't have that.
So let's take a little bit of a step forward here and talk about some of the resilience of rural and remote communities. We know that there are lots of challenges. We're acknowledging that, but we really do want to be able to be part of the solution to work on moving forward and taking those steps towards increased well-being.
And I think one of those things, and Paula, you and I, we've not only put it into practice, but we've been talking lots about it in different projects, is having those peer support groups. Because when you
Mhm.
people that have either been through similar situations, you know, just like newcomers coming in, if you have other newcomers and you're bringing together, they can talk a little bit about the challenges and then how did they find their way through that. Well, you need people who've experienced it. We can give great advice and talk about all these different sources and resources that are available, but we haven't lived it per se, you know, or
Yeah.
been in a number of years. So when you bring peer support together, they can have those conversations about how they made certain steps that maybe you and I might not even think about.
Yes, and we have seen firsthand what a developed peer support group can do for people. As we've talked about this before, we've ran our peer support group for close to 10 years, and our caregivers that are involved in this group are now starting to be able to make connections when they're in group in a better way, but they're also starting to provide extra support to each other, and they've started to connect outside of the group as well. And it has taken some time, and it's been consistent. We've put a lot of effort into this group, but peer support groups are wonderful. They work very well.
Mhm. And we know that some of the next things are being worked on within our own community, and that is that accessibility to community supports. We, you know, this is a piece of that in that project is really identifying some of those supports, but identifying the neighbors also that could help you out, and then building that culture and understanding that it could be your neighbor by doing a little bit more training. And that's what we have available and coming to you is a new curriculum-based training you could do online, and we'll also be providing it in person just to make you feel more confident and, like we always say, competent about being able to talk about the 8 domains, the impacts it has, and where do we find supports to do that. And whether that next step is a peer support group as well, that's a possibility, but we know this is of primary importance.
Absolutely. And then we can open this up so it's not just us talking about the 8 domains and making these connections for you. It would be someone in your workplace, maybe yourself, that's bringing it and building that community capacity, bringing it to the larger community as a whole as well.
Mhm. And then the few other things, and I do not want to trivialize in any way, is that affordable housing piece.
Mhm.
We talked about how prices are going up, and we're hearing this constant messaging about the cost of food and all of that. So we have to make sure some of these smaller centers as well, that we're formerly known as the place to go, because it could be so
Yeah,
much cheaper to live, but yet we've caught up. The house prices here look the same as moving into the city, and
yeah.
sometimes less opportunity because we only have so many houses. So,
Mhm.
and rent is going to be what rent is. So we have to look at ways to support families so that they can stay and be happy and healthy as well.
Absolutely. And it is very exciting. I do see that our mental health and substance use services are expanding it right in Wainwright, and this would be available for people in the MD as well. Our mental health and addictions office through Alberta Health Services now has 2 days of walk-in. So there's 2 hours on 2 days a week that people can just walk in, whether they've been there before or not. They just can walk in and see a counselor, whoever's available. So I think that is really wonderful to see, because I know for a lot of the people that I've supported and through my human service experience, that it sometimes it's just about they need it now. They can't wait 2 weeks for that appointment, or when 2 weeks comes, they don't have the transportation to be able to get there. And especially in the winter, we know that transportation, just there's that extra challenge with it. So this is really exciting to see that it expands, because this is a free service.
Yes. And the fact that you can walk in and you don't have to know that, oh, I believe this is a mental health and substance use problem that I have.
Exactly.
Just come on in, and they'll figure out if they're not the right place for you, they'll find you the resources then that are the right place for you.
Absolutely. And uh, often when you're making an appointment for mental health and addictions, they like to do an initial assessment, but that is not a barrier here either. They'll do that assessment when you come in. And again, like Shannon said, then they'll make the referral if they're not the right place for you to go. So that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
And we
I'll
just
let you talk about some of these stats, Shannon, our stats lady here.
Yes. And I don't want to dive in too deeply. We just simply wanted to say that these are some of the issues that don't just happen in rural or urban areas. They're happening out in our areas as well. When we talk about our first responders, there's some very challenging things going on. We talk about the opioid overdoses that, I would think any life lost in that capacity is one too many. But when we're talking 11
Yeah.
lives each day, that's a rate that just feels unacceptable to me, that we're simply not answering our call on this one, because we need our first responders, and we need to understand when we speak of first responders, that is broader than the firefighter, the policeman, the
Mhm.
EMTs.
The
It's
nurse. It
it's
is.
the nurses, the doctors, the school teachers, all of those kind of things as well. We talk about social workers lots. They're on that front.
Mhm.
They're supporting people. We take that in account if we're going to build strong, resilient rural community, that this is happening out here. We had the opportunity to speak to the fire chief very briefly here, and that was absolutely his message, because the people that are on his fire department have other jobs as well. So they have
Yeah.
two levels of stresses, and then they have to be able to manage that level of stress, that they may be involved in a very critical situation, being the firefighter, and then they have to go and show up for their other job in a mentally healthy way. But we don't
Yeah.
have supports that are there for them. So it becomes vitally important that we do teach people how to support people that are in those roles, and really be able for them to identify what areas are being impacted when we're dealing with these crisis situations, and how do we synthesize that information and still be healthy and resilient within our communities.
And when we're looking at these stats, I really appreciate the word that you said, Shannon, that it is unacceptable. I think that's how we have to look at it to move forward. And we have to really build this capacity together as a community, because these stats, this is unacceptable. 242 Canadian public safety and military personnel have died by suicide. Like all of these stats, it really is unacceptable. So we need to work together to support these people.
And I think when we start putting stats together, like we like to separate it out to get an understanding of what's happening in these specific areas. But we already talked a little bit about our impacts of our kiddos living out in rural, remote areas, and that increased substance use, the increase to obesity, the feelings and the rates of suicide attempts or ideations. All of those things have to be taken into account. And that's why I left this in as well to say about the 70% of mental health problems being early onset, right, in childhood and adolescence. So we got to make sure we've got the supports here, the people that can identify when there's something happening and get them to the right people. So, but then we have to have the right people on the other end of that. So it's all levels that we need to look at for sure. And
Absolutely.
we talked, about that 50% of all mental illnesses begin in childhood. So we got to make sure that, we used to call it early year support, but that was really meant for that kind of 5 and under. We've got to do teens now. And I think places like the FRN, that's the Family Resource Network, are a great place to start. They're bringing some focus back to that the youth years, and how we can support and find programs that are going to help them at initial stages before it's already developed into something broader where we need that clinical support.
Well, and the FRN is a great hub because we talk a lot about hubs. You don't have to know all of the support people in this community, but a place like the Family Resource Network, they're going to know, we have a Healthy Families program here. Here's a referral to them. Here's the number. We have Midwest Family Connections, where they do youth mental health and they do family support. So they will have these referral sources for you. And I think it's just finding some of these hubs to be able to take the first step is really important.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of why we bring the stats out, right? Is just purely to say there's work to be done. So what can we do, not as the clinician, as the professional per se, we can all have that potential impact just by learning a little bit more about all of the aspects of our mental health and well-being.
And so we take a step back again, and it's like, how do you know what you need? And I think it is just gaining some self-awareness, digging a little deeper, asking yourself some hard questions. There's lots of free tools at your disposal to figure out, what do I want? Is it journaling? Is it making a vision board? Is it doing some readings? Is it being involved in a peer support group to really know what you want your life to look like? And also to figure out what is holding you back, acknowledging, what's going on for you that's creating some of the fears, and how do you overcome that as well?
And I think we really are asking people to take that, as we put it, the step out of your comfort zone. Right? And that's okay. We acknowledge it too. Even though we've been in this industry for some time, we acknowledge that for most people, it may feel like it's out of their comfort zone, and it can almost be overwhelming because if you go on the internet, there's multiple different supports, and like, where do you begin? All of those things. But the first step is just saying, you know what, I don't know, I don't get it. It's okay. Not everybody needs to get it, but let's figure out how I can take one step forward and find out a little bit more and how that impacts me. And usually, not only in those hubs, but that can lead you down a path where you begin to expose yourself about all of this information.
Yeah, and when you're willing to take a step, most often your mind is open and willing to also see what else is out there. And I think that's really important. So let's move into the 8 domains.
Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, we're just going to briefly talk about each one of the domains, in understanding that we just want you to know when we talk about 8 domains, a little bit about each one of them. And then there's going to be many opportunities to either pull up one of our old webcasts, podcasts, And like we said, that new curriculum that's coming out, we'll dive deeper and be able to really, when we talk about exploring, we're really going to explore and then be able to find the pieces that work for you, your family, your friends, whomever that might be within your life.
Absolutely. So we'll start with emotional wellness, and emotional wellness relates to your ability to understand your own feelings and how to cope effectively with the stressors and challenges we've talked about a lot already. So they're there. How do you cope with them? How do you what tools do you have in your toolkit to be able to provide self-care for yourself, to be able to deal with stress and anxiety? And then how do you grow and develop from there?
And I think that goes back to that assessment piece, right? Quite
Mhm.
often when we think, or sometimes we identify the stress, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't know that the light is blinking at us saying, hey, it's time to do.
Yeah.
But often we may consider it being our emotional wellness or well-being. And it may just be related to other areas. But the more you learn, that's what you begin to understand. And then we begin to talk about techniques, whether it's meditation, which, then also brings in that spiritual piece. And then when we talk about self-care, we really want to make sure that it's not just about bubble baths. It's also about taking the pieces that you need that are going to work within your life. But we talk about self-kindness, and that's being kinder to yourself. And even when you're being stressed over something that somebody might figure it's kind of silly, why am I stressed over that? That's where the kindness needs to kick in and say, oh, okay, let's be kind with myself because I've had this and this and this going on. And then you might find your way through that because we're removing some of the judgment and bias that come with it.
And that's where you start to notice that negative self-talk that creeps in as well. So an
Mhm.
emotionally well person accepts who they are and they treat others well. And this is where we learn to be thankful and we learn to have gratitude for what's in our lives. And we begin to find meaning and we see the meaning in the things that we do each day.
I'll just give you a few little examples of things that, we already mentioned, maybe a little bit of meditation that might work, or just some quiet time. Maybe
Mhm.
it's just reading, just taking some time where you can remove your brain from just the work that you're feeling maybe stressed about, or the
Yeah.
that are just bringing that to you. Just separate out that time. But I like putting in the together all as well, because that's an anonymous place where you can find and your kids can find some support
And it's
around.
free as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. So those are just some of those little resources that are out there that can maybe just get you from point A to point B. You may not have all the answers, but certainly it's a great beginning.
And I think it's important to note that we really do need to take a little bit of time each day for ourselves. Or even if it's, I know I hear lots of parents say, well, how am I supposed to take time for myself?
Mhm.
I have 3 kids at home, or I'm a single parent with a child, and how do I get that time? But it doesn't always necessarily mean you need to have that alone time for, hours a day. It can just be even being quiet and having some time with just your own family without planned, structured activities. I think it's important to just to take that break and create some space to be able to have some quiet in your life.
And I remember I used to do that with my son, is that every Friday we just had a thing that we would go and get a small little Dairy Queen sundae. And it was so that we could kind of treat ourselves. It wasn't like super expensive, but it just gave us a little bit of time that was just about him and I, where we,
Mhm.
talk about silly things, not about big things, just silly things, or just be happy we're just eating a sundae and nothing more.
Exactly. No expectations. Sorry, I've moved us. I don't know what's happening with our slides here.
Oh,
There we go. That's where we are next. Our social wellness. Sorry, Shannon.
that is okay. And I think with social wellness, that's where we begin to reach out and figure out the pieces that we need within our life that build us up as well. That we're going to talk about, the healthy relationships, what that looks like. And that's all kinds of relationships, right? Not just the intimate relationships, but the peers that we have, our family relationships, all of those kind of things that are very important in our lives. But how do we create healthy boundaries around them as well?
And what is social, what do I need for my social wellness? And it's okay to know that. And it's okay that what I need for my social wellness is different than what you need, for example, Shannon. It's everyone has to figure out what is going to work for them, because if you try to match someone else, it's not necessarily what you need, and then you're not going to find that satisfaction. And I think in the end it's going to upset your wellness wheel. It's going to create an imbalance in your own wellness wheel.
For sure. And like you said, it's creating a world that is about you and the uniqueness of you as the person, you as the family member, all of those kind of things. And I know we bring up boundaries lots. It's not a negative thing. It's being able to carve out the pieces that are really important to you, that you still get all the things that social wellness has to offer, from the support and even laughter and fun, and sometimes the pieces where we can just go out and do things as a group and have no commitments or rules kind of around it, all of those kind of pieces. But it's about you and what you need to carve out to make you happy.
Well, and I think it's important as well, Shannon, to note that when we're talking about boundaries, we're not saying that boundaries are set in stone. I think that boundaries need to be fluid. And this week, if I have a very, very busy week at work and I'm feeling tired, maybe I'm thinking, oh, I'm feeling like I could get sick because I've just had such a busy week. My boundaries on the weekend socially are going to be way different than maybe on a week when I'm feeling just exuberant and so energetic. It's okay that they can look different. We don't have to justify why they are different. They are our boundaries, and they need to be right for us and our families.
And I think that just brings to the point of, this time of year being summer, we feel that extra pressure that we only have so much time summer. We should get out, we should be having fun. But you're right. If it's been a tough week, sometimes you just need silence, and that's okay. It doesn't matter that if it's 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever it is until our snow flies out here. It's okay. It's okay to take time and just be okay in it.
I heard someone say that when I was looking at plants the other day. Oh, we don't need any more plants. We only have 1 month left. No, we don't.
Yeah,
that's it in rural Alberta. That is how we feel. We only have so much time. We need to get it all in, and then you're feeling burnt out by the end of the summer. And I don't think that does anyone any good. So let's move on to our environmental wellness. And so environmental wellness it helps us take a look at, it's not just about the reduce, reuse, and recycle, although that is a huge part of it, but we also have to take a look at our surroundings, and whether it's our surroundings on the outside out of our houses or our own surroundings on the inside of our houses. And we did a podcast with Carolyn McCauley, and she talks about some tips and some tricks and some strategies that she uses for environmental wellness. And I really encourage you to listen to that podcast. It's a unique take on the environmental wellness piece.
And I think when we make that distinction between urban and rural, again, that the environmental piece does look different. Once again, the access to whether it is just in a recycle aspect looks different, but it doesn't mean that it's not as important. It's just as different. I think that we're constantly talking about environment out here because we have so much agricultural land. We're a part of that resource and that export that coming out of this province, that we need to take care of it. And our farming families would absolutely agree that when this is also not just impacting their environment, is impacting their entire lives, from their finances, all of those different aspects, when we don't take care of that environment.
Yes, and that's exactly what our next slide says. It's about building that inclusive and sustainable community, because it does impact so much of our lives, for sure.
And I think what we're doing, what I see even in this year, we have another new community garden that has opened up at
Yeah.
Nazarene. That's an excellent thing, because I think we get caught up in thinking, oh, you're from an agricultural area, everybody should have access to a garden or be able to grow their own things. Well, that's actually not the case. So it becomes really important that we still offer these opportunities for people to be able to know what it feels like to grow some of their own food, even in a financial sense. That opportunity can just really impact families as well.
And it's one of those things, when I grow something myself, it's not only contributing to my environmental wellness, but it contributes to so much more for me, my
Yes.
emotional wellness, like social, because often I share with people or we trade. I was going to mention, we had Ashley Longstaff on one of our podcasts, and she did something with the clients that she supports. She did a potato planting initiative, and the potato bags that she ordered didn't come in, so she got creative and she purchased laundry baskets, lined them with landscape fabric, and planted potatoes in them. And some of the potatoes are just growing wild, and it's just so cool for clients. Even if they live in an apartment, they can have this potato basket out on their balconies, and they can start to see what it feels like to grow their own food. So that was a really cool local initiative that she did. So just love when people are thinking outside the box.
And just that, when we talk about going out and cleaning up that environment and doing it as a community, that really does community connection and bring people together. So I think that's really important. And it is nicer to look outside and that garbage picked up, but it's not just about one person or one group doing it. We're all taking responsibility and respecting our environment. And that does connect people. I've spent years working with kiddos to be able to feel connected to their community. And something as simple as that really does, because when they've cleaned up the area, they're also feeling a little bit more connected to it and going to respect it in a different way, and going to feel differently if somebody throws something down. But you can't feel that until you do it.
Oh, absolutely. And our last little picture here is volunteering at a thrift store, or donating to those in need. In our community, we do have 3 thrift stores. One is actually a free. It's donate clothing, you can take clothing, you can exchange, and it is a good way to be able to reduce your footprint as well. And purchasing clothes or picking up clothes from the thrift store is it's fun.
Oh, it is
to
fun.
look through and find treasures and replenish what you've donated.
And not only can you save money, sometimes I know for myself, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of money on something that I'm not going to wear that much. It's
Yeah, for sure.
crazy to me. And I have got the nicest dress pants and things like that I would never have spent that kind of money on. So it always makes me happy, and it makes me just as happy to be able to pass on my own things. I buy things and I think, oh, I love this more than anything. And then I wear it a few times and it's really not as lovable as I thought it was going to be. I just need to pass it on to somebody who is going to love it. And I think what a great feeling when you've done that.
Well, and we've had Josh on our webcasts and podcasts before, and he bought a sewing machine. And so if he goes thrifting, because sometimes the clothes don't fit the way you want them to fit, and so then he can alter them as needed. And so what a great way. He actually has bought fabric from thrift stores to be able to make some of his own clothes also.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, I always appreciate when people are thinking outside the box a little bit.
And it creates a little bit of a hobby as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
The accomplishment when you can actually make something. And we talk lots about that with whether it's painting or whatever it is. So yeah.
Well, it brings us right into our next
Yes. For sure.
slide here, our intellectual wellness. It's not just like you've already said this already today, Shannon. It's not just about going to school, taking the classes. It's about being curious. And if that is buying a sewing machine and figuring out, okay, how am I going to make the most out of this sewing machine? And it, it serves some purposes. You're learning, you're being creative, you're being curious, all of that, expanding your knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. And the things that you can, like Josh, now as he not only expanded into potentially a new hobby, he's also working on that environmental wellness piece. And I know it's really important to him is to find a sustainable way of living, but it is promoting that learning and growth in the brain that is so important at every age, no matter what developmental stage we're at. If we're not constantly using our brain, it's like any other muscle. It's going to begin to deteriorate and not be where we want it to be. So if that's something that motivates you to do that, it's no different than just doing a crossword puzzle. That's as intellectually stimulating as anything else.
Oh, absolutely. Or just doing a puzzle at your kitchen table, or coloring. Oh, there's so many beautiful coloring pages out there now. So yeah, there's so many ways to develop your intellectual wellness.
And this is a few slides that just dive a little bit deeper about, some of those kind of reminders about just be open-minded, right? Open yourself up to something that, we talked about earlier, maybe slightly out of your comfort zone, but that's when you begin to really learn something new, because you're not just staying in that area that you've already developed. And that's what builds the brain and builds that capacity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things that we can do that, like if I want to be creative, I don't have to be able to draw the perfect picture or paint the perfect picture. I can find things that are going to work for me and that are still going to access that part of my brain.
Mm-hmm. And this can be done for an entire family. And I think that's what we just wanted to make a point on this slide to say, is that it doesn't have to always be done in isolation. Do it as a family. Get those games out. Do something that is a physical game or just a class you go to, but just you can do it all together, whatever that picture of a family looks like for you. So you're going to actually connect with a few aspects of your wellness. When we talk a little bit already about the social wellness and that emotional wellness, and now you're also modeling how to be curious, how to have fun, how to build the brain without it. Nobody likes it when we sit down and say, hey, let's talk about how we're going to build our brain today.
Yeah.
If you got out a game, they're probably going to buy into that one.
Yeah. Or have a family paint night, for example. Remember when we had a paint night a few years ago and we didn't have anyone instructing us? We just picked a picture, had it up on the computer, and then we all visited and talked and ate and painted, and it was so much fun. And I think for kids, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yes.
Just that together time can just be what it is.
Yes. And that's the learning in itself about leaving that perfection piece behind, because it's just really is for fun.
Absolutely.
And I think we've done a little exploring around the physical wellness. Once again, let's not pigeonhole the physical wellness piece into, yes, gyms and personal trainers and yoga classes. They are all awesome things. And if that is something that inspires you, please, do that. But it doesn't have to be as elaborate as that. It can be as simple as just going out and walking, just being out in that environment, and then also taking care of that physical piece, because you'll find that it also give your mind and your emotions that time and space it might need to just recover from a tough day.
Well, and even just being outside, you're still meeting your physical needs sometime. It was pretty hot on the weekend here, and for myself, I wanted to be outside, but I didn't really feel like gardening or doing any yard work per se because it was quite warm. But just being outside, I actually just read a book outside, but it still really connected to my physical well-being. I still needed that sunshine, like we talked about. There's, that mindset of there's only so many days in the summer. And so it doesn't always have to be that strenuous activity. as we know, because physical wellness can also be about getting enough sleep, nourishing the body with healthy foods, having regular doctor's appointments, eye appointments, those kind of things, and accessing your mental health supports when needed.
Oh, for sure. And I think that that's what's important, right? Really challenge yourself. Once again, step out of your own box and see and begin to explore what works for you, or mix it up, do a little bit of everything. That's okay as well. But ultimately, it's finding your niche of what you like to do. Just like the brain, you want to build that muscle. We want to make sure we're using our muscles and our joints and all of those things because it's about longevity. And where do we want to be in the future? What do we want to be capable of doing? And so just like the brain, we want to make sure that through sleep, through proper eating, all of those things impact our physical health and well-being. So it's really important that, that community garden that plays in that having the vegetable that is actually just right there, made right there, not transported thousands and thousands of miles. And I don't want to take away from that. Anyone who lives in rural areas, we know the majority of our food is still to this day brought in to us, even though we have, all of this agricultural land around us. But exposing yourself. Lots of places now are doing that farm to table. So in the fall, they'll have those opportunities where you can explore different farms and see what they have to offer and be able to begin to get your resources for those whole foods right available to you next door.
Well, when I only had one strawberry. I've had two strawberries on my bush, but the other day I had one strawberry, and it's just so exciting to have one strawberry. But there's just a sense of accomplishment when you're eating your own vegetables. I have a big pot on my deck that has kale in it, and to be able to just cut my kale and chop it up for a salad it feels good. And I think that's where you're hitting more than one domain. Absolutely. Is by doing things like that. Like I look at the picture of the family that are cooking together. That's more than just physical wellness there as well. You're a lot of that's that interconnectedness and the interdependence is that we can connect to more than one domain by doing some of these things.
And once again, that modeling piece becomes so important. But we want to keep going here.
Yeah, we missed our spiritual wellness picture, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's funny.
Just go on.
So what we were just going to say, we kind of alluded to this earlier, is that spiritual well-being impacts all of those areas. We talked about a few different ways about whether it be meditation, whether it be a church group, church service themselves. There's all different kinds of things, and I know we're pretty traditional out here as well, because once again, we live where we live, but slowly beginning to expand that. And sometimes we need to be the one taking the lead on that expansion. So yes. It's okay to begin to offer things and reaching out to other people and finding out if that's something they're interested in as well. Because when you can do things collectively, it also hits all of those other aspects on the domain wheel, but it can also bring you a sense of peace and purpose in your life. As we do implore you to really reach out and figure out what it is that spiritual wellness means to you, but really being open-minded again to what it could be to you.
Well, and some people find a real spiritual connection when they're out in nature. We in Wingright and in the MD, there's lots of different walking paths. They have lots of walking paths in town. I know that they've created walking paths out by Arm Lake and Clear Lake, out by Riverdale. Explore your own backyard and connecting to nature and being outside, or even taking that time when you're on a walking trail by yourself, just noticing your surroundings. Sometimes that it really connects to your spiritual well-being as well, because I think that's very similar to when you're taking time to meditate. It's giving yourself space and time to just have a bit of a chance to just tune inwards and get to know your inner self a little bit more as well. So lots of opportunities, I think, in our rural area to be able to do that.
Yes, for sure. And these are just a few pictures highlighting a few of those things that you could do together. But most importantly, it's whatever speaks to you that's really going to draw and solidify that spiritual well-being for yourself. And of course, we probably also talked, a little bit snippets around financial wellness because we're always talking about it. And when we look back to the stats, it is one of those pieces that do kind of rise up to the surface quite a bit when people think that they're feeling stressed. They're often talking about finances, and sometimes it's just purely about not understanding it. It's not always something that we're taught per se in school. I think that was the one fortunate piece I can say for myself is while I was in high school, I started taking accounting classes. So it gave me a little bit of a base that I realized most people actually didn't have, right down to how do you use a bank and bank accounts, and then how do you basically find a balance in all those inputs and outputs of our money that we have or lack thereof sometimes. So it is important to reach out though and not feel as though you should know, because that's why people take years of schooling in order to support people with their accounting. So don't feel as though you should have knowledge that maybe you don't have, other than the basic sense of we might know what we get paid and we might know we have a whole lot of expenses, but there might be some great creative ways of finding new ways to manage that money. So reach out. And I think we did a great podcast with Roxanne. And she talked about understanding the person first and who they are and what was important to them before you begin to make plans about your finances, and even those long-term plans as well. That's so exciting because accounting people maybe didn't necessarily start out that way, where we look to the person first and say, oh, what's important? They just would tell you how to manage your money, where that's really flipping into, hey, let's figure out who you are, what your primary importance in life is, where you want to be down the road, and how that's going to impact you to get there. And then about how you're going to save, spend, borrow, all of those kind of things, because that looks different for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we were even surprised that she is taking that approach, and that approach of person first is part of the financial industry. And I think that's at least new for me, that she's asking the question, what is going on in your life? Where do you want to be? Looking at goals. And Roxanne did talk a lot about just look at your finances. So many people, financial stress is huge, and so many people just can't even look at it because it's so overwhelming. And she just said you need to get in that habit of just taking a look, because it takes some of the fear out of that also.
And we're not saying you need to be hyper vigilant by any ways, but just kind of knowing where you're at can reduce stress.
That for sure
is probably sitting in the back of your mind anyways.
Oh, for sure it is. And I think that's the key, is that we forget that how, when we put things out of our mind, they're still sitting on our shoulders, weighing us down a little bit. So take a look or access programs in the community to be able to get that support, or go to your financial institution and talk to someone, and they'll direct you to where you need to go. We have Roxanne's information listed here as well. So lots of great resources.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and as we are kind of rounding around that entire wheel, we've also talked about our our employment, about how that impacts us, and just determining that looks different for everybody. Some people just want to work to make money and then go do the things they love, where other people need to be passionate about what they do, and then they also do the things they love too. But it doesn't matter. It's up to you where you fall in that, and you don't need to fall on one side or the other. But I do think it needs to be at least something that you can show up every day for. because
Yeah, and that it's not
so
going to
great.
be that, constant, what is the Sunday scaries where you're just Sunday night, you're so stressed about getting up and going to work again, because that's going to throw off your whole balance of your wheel, and it's going to create a lot of other problems. You have to figure out, how can I go to work and be okay going to work?
And I know even for myself, I've always had to make choices of where I could go because, Paul and I have talked lots about, we've got lots of different kind of education, and we could land there, but then I needed to land where I am motivated every day and passionate
Hmm.
about what I'm talking about. That's what drives me. That doesn't mean that drives everybody. And it's certainly, we joke all the time about maybe it doesn't necessarily make us rich, but it's certainly rich in wealth of knowledge, as maybe opposed to money at times, but that's okay because those are the choices that drive me forward, make me want to learn a little bit more. So I'm exploring those intellectual pieces as much as I'm exploring my occupational pieces, but it makes me want to get up when I get to do something like this. I am motivated and I can't wait to do that work and talk about it. So
Hmm.
that is a driving force for me. And at times it has been out of my comfort zone as well. That doing webcasts and podcasts weren't, the first thing, even if you talked to me 5 years ago, I would have said, oh, for sure, that's something I'm going to do on a regular basis. But I do love talking about it lots. So it seems become a almost natural fit.
Hmm. So occupational wellness for families. So I think it's a great idea to have kids connect and be able to contribute each day by having some sort of responsibility in the house. They're not slaves, obviously, that's not what we're suggesting, but just having people have some responsibility. It feels good for the person as well as it contributes to the family. And it provides a way of finding meaning and purpose. If you're taking your child to volunteer with you when you're out doing whatever you're doing, Communities in Bloom just had their anniversary in Wainwright, and maybe it's bringing your child to help out with planting flowers or something. They're going to feel really good about seeing that they're contributing to the overall beauty of their community. And they're going to carry that with them throughout their lives, and they're going to seek out other opportunities to be able to help out in their communities. And maybe they're going to learn some new skills on the other side of that as well. So great things to be able to do.
Once again, we're just purely saying, um, begin to explore where the challenges are, and you can do that through the personal assessment. That is kind of that beginning stage of beginning to understand what each of those domains are about, and then it opens up that, hey, maybe this is the area I'm challenged in, so maybe that can become a focus. Not to say you're going to forget about all of those other aspects, and then creating a toolkit for yourself, so that as you move forward, it's something
Sorry,
that you can take with you.
sorry, Shannon. I thought maybe I was on the wrong slide here. I just wanted to reiterate what you're saying, Shannon, about a toolkit, because I think sometimes the word toolkit sounds overwhelming in itself, but it really is just having some things that you can draw on when you need them. For example, if gardening is something that you like to do, or volunteering is something that you like to do, or that you can be re-energized by taking the family bowling, and you have some social aspects to that. It's having those things that are going to work for you. That's what we're talking about when we have a toolkit. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be overwhelming.
Oh, for sure. And we talked a little bit about support groups and things like that. But
Changing the slide.
this is a lifelong discovery piece, and that's what we're suggesting. You talked about things being fluid, and that's what becomes important, that whether you set boundaries or you explore a certain area, that can change. What your spirituality is today might look different 10 years from now, just might be a little bit more elaborate, might be in a different direction, whatever it is, but just opening up yourself to be available to do that learning and really find what speaks to you, so that you are constantly building up all of those aspects of your wellness.
Absolutely. And again, this is just reiterating what you're saying, Shannon, is the curiosity, the creativity, that lifelong learning is a huge piece. And questioning, I think we did miss that a little bit. Questioning what it could even be questioning what you're doing well. Is this still working for me? Is there something I want to change? Is there something I want to add? Or is there something I want to take away? So I think by adding to that curiosity is adding some questioning in, looking at what you need, and then looking to outside supports as well, because they can give you some ideas on what you need, or maybe what you need to take away.
For sure.
So again, staying open-minded. Talked about that earlier, exposing yourself to different things. And I think that I think that sometimes people think because we are in a small rural community that there's not a variety of things that we can do, but I think we've talked about a lot today. And sometimes it's creating your opportunities. The new community garden started by someone having an idea and then pitching it to someone else, and then bringing in other people to expand on that idea and really get the project underway, because it is a big project and it takes people, but it is it is available. I think of some of the things that our public library is doing. They have some fantastic programs this summer and are really expanding. They have a program where you can connect with a pen pal.
Yes.
And do this over the summer. So I think we have to really be willing to see what's out there and access what's out there as well.
Yes, exactly. And then, like we said, it always takes some time and reflection, but you have to give yourself the time to be able to reflect upon it, ask some of those tough questions about truly what is going well or what is challenging you. Because, if the light is on, maybe it's not blinking, but maybe it's on to tell us that now's the time to do that work of challenging ourselves, because we could create a different future than what we're currently living. But we have to do the work. It's going back to the orchestra again. If you don't practice every day, you're still going to sound like you're warming up when the rest of the group is actually playing the music. So really important, right, that we can do all of those pieces and open ourselves up for that very aspect.
Exactly. So this brings us to the kind of formal piece of our finding our resources in our community. We have been working on our mental health and well-being resource hub. It's on our website, sagewellnessconnection.com, at the mental well-being resource hub. And Shannon's done a lot of work on this, gathering informal and formal resources such as Impact, Clarity Financial, all of these resources, putting them in one hub. Like we talked about earlier, it's easier to branch out if you can just find that hub. And that's what we've been doing as part of the Rural Mental Health Project, is putting this hub together and finding those resources for you. But we also like to work and connect with community members, because like we said, we don't know all of these resources. So if you have ideas, if you think that we're missing people on our resource hub, please send us an email or connect with us through our website or social media and let us know. Or if you yourself have something that you would like us to put on the mental wellbeing resource hub, let us know.
Absolutely. We're always looking, like Paula said, for some new resources to add to that, new connections. And it's the unusual suspects at times that
Yes.
bring some really unique ideas to the forefront, like the library. People would think, oh, that's just filled with books, but they provide so much programming, so much learning for all stages of life. It's well
Yeah,
worth having a look into.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And like we said, please connect to our other podcasts, and that our podcasts are available on Spotify or iTunes, and it is under the Wellness Connection. And all our podcasts are listed there. Our webcasts are available on YouTube. So just connect to Stage Wellness Connection on YouTube, or check us out on Instagram or Facebook, or directly to our website. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again.